It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me my co-host, the wonderful and talented Mr. Andy Grabner. Andy, how are you doing today?
You're very good, but I'm a little surprised now because you announced that you have actually rehearsed this whole intro, but it didn't sound anything different.
Well, I haven't gotten to it yet, and now you gave it away. See, so now everyone's going to know it's good. So anyway, I got to tell you, I had a very, very weird dream last night.
No,
you were in it. You were in it. So I was walking down Grubenstraße, and did I get that right? Street.
Yeah, Straße. Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know how to do that weird B character. And suddenly I hear, "Hey, Brian," and I look, and it's you in an alley, but your voice is obviously different, right? It's very much harsher and more masculine. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, "Andy, what are you doing here in Linz?" And you're like, "Brian, come here." So I go into the alley with you, and you're like, "I need to show you something," and you pull out your phone. You like my impersonation of you, right? Yeah. You show me on my phone a picture of my children, like bound to chairs. I'm like, "Andy, what's going on here? I thought we were friends. What are you doing?" He's like, "I took your children hostage. If you want to get them back, you have to pay a ransom." And I was like,
"This is now a Scottish accent, though, that you are." I'm not Scottish. This was like a Scottish accent almost.
So then I'm like, wait a minute, Andy, let me get this straight. You have my children hostage. You want me to pay a ransom to get them back. Otherwise, you keep them. You're like, "Yes, that is right." And so I said, "All right, well, enjoy my kids because you just set me free. So thanks." But anyway, I figured it was appropriate to bring up today because, it's I think a little bit on topic.
Yeah,
maybe a
little bit. Like how bad of a dad you are that you want to give your kids away. Is that what it is? Or you're talking about keeping the things that are precious to you safe and sound and
secure.
And secure, right? In the Austrian way, for kids, we typically put them into basements and lock them in so that nobody can steal them. Yeah. But I think this is enough with the jokes today. Exactly. I think enough with the jokes. The topic today is security. And Brian, I think last year or the last year and a half, when we talked about security, we often talked about Log4Shell and Log4j. It felt like this topic kind of took over the security world, at least in our small security world that the two of us live in, because we are just, hearing what our listeners kind of bring to us. But to learn a little bit more about what else is out there in security, we've actually invited Stefan Achleitner today to the show. Stefan, sorry for going through all of this, trying to be funny in the beginning. But finally, it's time for you.
We're apologizing for jokes. It means it didn't work too well. Yeah. I was proud of that one, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it was good. It was good, though.
Sure.
But Stefan, finally, thank you so much for being on the show. Could you do us the favor, say hi to the audience and quickly introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and why you think you're on the podcast today?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very excited to be on the podcast. So it was funny to listen to your intro. So I'm with Dynatrace since about 1 year. So my 1 year anniversary is coming up soon, actually. And I've been working in the field of cybersecurity for about 10, 12 years. I actually got into it when I moved from Austria to the US, which was about 12 years ago. To study cybersecurity, and then I worked a few years in California for some other security providers, mostly focused on threat detection, attack detection, understanding how attacks work, how you basically develop new models, new approaches for advanced attack detection. And about a year ago, I got the chance to actually lead the security research here at Dynatrace. Which was a very exciting opportunity that I took, and I'm really happy about this opportunity. And very recently, I moved back to Austria, where I'm originally from. So it's nice to spend time again with family and not just coming home like once a year, but more frequently. So it was a great combination with Dynatrace, the job opportunity, and moving again.
In which lab do you work?
So I'm usually my main office is in the Vienna lab, but I'm very frequently also in Linz. Cool. So the team that we have that are working in security research, they're mostly in Linz, but also some people are in Vienna.
Yeah. Cool. And Stefan, and also maybe for the audience, we will discuss a lot of topics. You did a great job in giving us some background details on what we should discuss, what actually matters to the security aware people out there. And folks, if you hear anything and we discuss, let's say, a particular article or something like that, and we always try to then follow up also with links. So Stefan, also for you, if you have any additional material, right, on any papers, blog posts, then we'll try to then add them to the description of the blog.
Definitely.
Yeah, but I really want to jump into the topic because, as I said, typically when we get kind of in touch with security, and especially in the last year and a half, most of them were centered around Log4Shell and Log4j, and then think Spring for Shell. So kind of looking back on what happened in the last year, can you give us a little overview of what attacks were out there? Was it really just Spring for Shell or Log4Shell? Were there other things out there as well that didn't make it to the news as prominently, but that everybody should be aware of?
Yeah, actually, Log4Shell, I don't want to go into that because, as you already said, people talk so much about it. But if we look a year back, Log4Shell was very prominent. And the interesting thing that just a few months after Log4Shell, Spring for Shell came around, which was a very similar vulnerability that actually affected a lot of companies and a lot of software because it was part of the Spring framework. And I don't want to talk too much about Spring for Shell at the moment, but maybe a little bit more later because it's a really nice example what I think we need to do or where research needs to go to better understand those type of vulnerabilities. So that was certainly like a big thing in the past year. One other thing that I recently read in studies, and that was kind of surprising to me, but you can explain it if you think about it, is that ransomware attacks are still very big. I'm sure everybody heard about ransomware attacks, right? When you encrypt basically the data and then ask for ransom. And actually what we saw in about the second half of last year is that actually ransomware attacks are going down, which means not as many companies report anymore that they were attacked by ransomware. So we really see the trend going down, and that is multiple reasons. So from the very beginning, like I also did a little bit of work on ransomware, but when it all started, from the very beginning, people always said, or organizations like the FBI, for example, in the US, and also security providers said, don't pay the ransom because it actually enables attackers or motivates attackers to keep doing that, right? And also you fund the attackers that are doing that.
That's sorry to interrupt, but this is a really interesting thought. So basically, with giving it so much public scene, basically, the criminals kind of learn, hey, this is actually working, and it's working pretty well, so let's do it as well. By talking less about it, we can downplay the impact it can have, and therefore hopefully encourage fewer criminals to actually do it. Do I get this right? Is this kind of the...
Somewhat. So there are a few factors why it's going down. One of the factors is that it's actually getting harder to pay the ransom, because if you look back how ransomware started, basically cryptocurrencies were an enabler for ransomware, right? Because suddenly you can pay large amounts of money in an anonymous way, basically. And this is getting harder and harder to do because countries start to regulate cryptocurrencies. And also, if you look at big crypto exchange sites like Coinbase, for example, they have limits. You cannot just go there and say, hey, I want to buy $2 million worth of Bitcoin. They will not give that to you in a day. And if you tell them, oh, it's to pay off some attackers for ransomware attack, they will not do that, right? They will not give you the money. So it's getting harder and harder for the victims to actually pay it, which is a good thing. And actually, in a study that I've read last year, people did some investigation. Actually, only 8% of the organizations that paid a ransom got the data back. Actually, only 8%. So it's really not a good idea to pay a ransom. And I think more and more organizations start doing that. And so the business model is basically slowly disappearing for attackers. And that's why we see the trend going down.
So the fact that the ransomware hackers are bad businessmen and don't give the data is ruining their own business model, because people are like, well, if I pay you, I have an 8% chance of getting. So it's their own bad business practices, which is killing them, which is funny. I would also imagine too, and I don't remember if this one was in the document and all, but when we talk about the cryptocurrencies, I imagine the instability of that market is also making it less attractive for the ransomware hackers, because $2 million in Bitcoin today, tomorrow might not be worth anything. Or
exactly. That is a good point. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I never thought about this, but makes a lot of sense. That's why we have these podcasts. We always say, Brian and I, we are actually the most beneficiaries of these podcasts, because we always learn so much from our guests. And thank you so much, Stefan, for bringing this up. Now, you also said that technology is catching up. You mean with technology, really the defense mechanisms, I guess, right?
Yes. Correct. Right. So I mean, ransomware was something new, and you see that the technology to detect it is just catching up. There are frameworks out there that basically allow you to just create ransomware, and more and more vendors detect it. So that's also like a factor. So really, multiple factors come together that we see ransomware attacks going down. And also people get more aware of it, but not want to say, hey, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You should still be very cautious about that.
Yeah, I think I just want to add in one last thing too, that I think at least for the home market of ransomware, right? This doesn't really apply to the business side of it, but there are plenty of people who get their computers hacked. I actually know somebody who called me up and was like, hey, what do I do if my computer's been ransomware hacked? I was like, my first question was like, well, where do you back up all of your important stuff to? And he goes, but the thing is, so many laptops, your phones, your devices, they come pretty much set up for you to easily turn on auto backup, right? So if you have an iPhone, you can easily be storing all your photos, all that sentimental stuff that you want to keep in backup somewhere. So if someone gets your device, it's like, all right, great, you got my device. I'll throw that out and get a new one, because everything else is backed up somewhere safely. I imagine that's not quite the same for businesses and the hospitals and all those other people that are getting hacked on that side. But to your point, the whole ecosystem for this sort of attack is becoming diminishing returns on it.
Exactly, yeah. So, Stefan, anything else? I mean, we kind of to wrap up, like what we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, one trend that we've also seeing is the war of Russia on Ukraine actually also really caused the trend that we saw in different malwares. And we talked about ransomware. There is a financial interest for attackers to make an attack, right? What we really saw when the conflict in Ukraine started is that there's suddenly malware that is only destructive, that is really only want to disrupt critical infrastructure, really just to wipe out computers without giving you the option to recover it. It's a really destructive malware with no other goal than just to do damage, no financial interest. So this was really a trend that came up in spring last year when this whole conflict started, which was interesting to see, but also scary to see, right? That really this unfortunate war is also really happening in cyberspace.
Yeah, it's full-on cyber war at this point, right? Interesting. I didn't know that was going on. I think that's I don't know. Over here, I didn't hear about that. So that's really just now. If they were smart, here's an idea for them. If they're smart, they'll be like, you have 10 days to pay or we destroy, and then they get some of the Bitcoin maybe, and then they destroy anyway. So they get double bounty.
Brian, don't give these people that listen to our podcast any new ideas.
Someone's thought of it. Somebody's thought of it. Come on.
Yeah.
It's all going to come out to me. That Brian Wilson.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, Stefan, okay, that was really insightful, especially for me. I guess ransomware obviously was something I had on the radar because we also heard it in Austria. I remember certain local governments and hospitals were impacted by it. And obviously the conflict in Ukraine is close to our doors here. And that's why we hear a lot of this also in the news. Moving a little further ahead now, looking at kind of, current challenges, because obviously I guess the attackers are we're not just making the lives harder for attackers, but I guess they will also get creative and come up with some new things, right? If you make things harder, then people become innovative. So what are kind of the current challenges that you see out there in cybersecurity? Is there anything you can tell us?
Yeah, there are certainly many challenges. In general, you can say that we're talking about the attack surface, so basically the possibilities how to attack certain systems is just growing every day. The more we are connected, the more digital products we use, the larger our attack surface gets. Basically, that's just a fact. One really important thing for me is that we start to better understand and start to develop better things about the software supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. There were also recent attacks about the software supply chain. I'm sure that you all heard about, for example, the attack on SolarWinds, or also the attack on the Colonial pipeline, which actually happened when I still lived in the US, and we really saw gas prices going up on the East Coast. And this is really a very important angle for me in cybersecurity, to better understand where certain software components are coming from. Mm-hmm. Because if you look into modern software, it's not written from scratch, right? You use libraries that are either proprietary from vendors, or that are coming from open source repositories, for example. And so you have so many different levels and so many different angles where you could have a supply chain attack, which would basically mean someone is smuggling a piece of malicious code into your whole benign supply chain. So that can happen that someone embeds something that harvests data from your machine into a library that maybe just draws charts, right? Mm-hmm. And so understanding how the software is coming from, but also understanding how software behaves, and to find out how it should not behave, or what's the expected behavior and how it should not behave. That's something I think will be becoming more and more important to be able to detect such kind of attacks. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is, if you think about a library that just draws charts, right? You give it data and it gives you back a picture. If such a component would suddenly start to, for example, send out a lot of network data that you could certainly monitor, there is something fishy going on, right? Like, why is it doing that? And so to understand the behavior of certain components, how our software is constructed, I think this will be a key factor in order to detect such kind of supply chain attacks that I'm pretty sure will get more. Because as I said, you have, if you consider the whole software supply chain, you have so many different levels where you can attack.
Yeah, this reminds me of last week we had Trace Test, a company that is doing validations of distributed traces. And the point is, right, they are capturing distributed traces, let's say open telemetry. You're capturing an open telemetry trace of an application that you're testing, and then you're validating in the end if that trace actually looks like what you expect. So your example, rendering an image, you have this feature in a microservice, and then you're looking at the trace and you're expecting it takes, that amount of time, that amount of CPU memory, and maybe it makes one call out to fetch something from the file system, and that's it. But if all of a sudden that trace looks differently during testing, something has changed, and then you want to flag it. But I also think it's interesting that you want to probably do this also in a production environment almost, where you say, I want to keep validating if my transactions, if my code is still having kind of the same fingerprint or the same kind of behavior for certain activities. And Brian, this also reminds me of the performance signature that we had back in the days, where it's kind of like what now evolved into our quality gates.
Yeah.
But basically figuring out how does the software behave, and then kind of giving it a fingerprint, and then you say, if it doesn't behave that way anymore, then something has changed. And if that change in behavior comes out of nowhere, then this is suspicious.
Yeah, I could see that being really challenging too, though, because if you're talking about organizations that have a really fast-paced release cycle, like the Amazons of the world or something, right? I mean, fortunately, there's not too many regular companies that are that fast-paced, but that sort of thing becomes a challenge. I think what the interesting thing is the more you would try to keep up with it, like if you're just looking at the network payload and looking for large chunks of extra network to protect yourself, that, like any sort of criminal activity, is going to force the criminals to get smarter and be like, well, what if we do, instead of larger chunks, a lot smaller bits of data, but constant, so it's a very tiny little difference, right? It's going to force them to evolve, and it's always going to be this, what they call the cat and mouse game. But I think that's just the nature of humanity. I guess we'll turn this into a humanity philosophical. No, but it's just funny. The more you try to get ahead of it, the more it forces the hackers to innovate, because there's no real way to get them to stop. Without some ideological, maybe if aliens come down and we all unite finally. But then someone will go to work for the aliens to get our data for them anyway. So I'm full of ideas today. But yeah, no, very interesting stuff. I think there definitely can be some sort of fingerprints, of code execution, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. This fingerprinting, this profiling of software, and to understand what it really does. I think this is just very critical for cybersecurity.
You mentioned the term open source earlier, and I don't want to open up a can of worms here, because I know this is a bigger discussion. But obviously, the open source, I guess it always goes in multiple ways. But some people say, we cannot use open source because maybe the source code is open, and if there's a vulnerability, everybody knows the vulnerability. And then if we even say we're using this library because we make a public endorsement, and they also that we are using this library. But I also think that open source obviously is here to stay, and it is without open source we wouldn't be where we are. What is your just quick take on it? Because without opening up a can of worm, what should open source, or what can open source projects do to make sure they're not kind of labeled as we not use you because of security concerns?
I mean, there's a saying in security that security by obscurity usually is not a good approach. It doesn't work, which means to just, if you hide something, if you don't tell people how things work exactly, it does not mean it will be prevented that it doesn't get attacked. And that's how I see open source, because if you have a large open source project where a lot of people working on it, it's actually a very good vetting process that you say, okay, I maybe have a few people that have malicious intent, but I think the majority of the people will have good intent. And if it's open source, everybody can see it. And the people that are really trustworthy or that have good intent, it's more likely that they catch that there's a vulnerability or that there's a malicious piece of code in an open source repository than if it's completely closed, right? If you have a supply chain attack on a proprietary software, like there's only a limited group of people that can really review the code and detect it. If you have open source, everybody can do it, and a much larger group of people will potentially see it. So, so from that perspective, I think we can trust open source software even more.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think about the ones that we know of, with regard to supply chain, as you were talking about, the big one that everyone knows about was the SolarWinds, right? And that was not open source.
Right.
And for all the open source advocates out there, they'll probably be really into finding it and stopping it as soon as possible to protect open source, right? So they're equally motivated to be on top of it, and if something does get found, get their heads together and fix it right away so that they don't have a tarnished reputation in everything that they love and been working on. Whereas a private company will be like, well, their actuaries will be like, well, this will only cost us, $3 million, which you can easily swallow and then do some PR or whatever. Whereas the open source community, you live and die by that, right? So I think to your point, they might be a lot more motivated to stay on top. I never really thought of it that way. So, yeah, interesting.
Is there anything else on this kind of topic that you want to highlight before we move on?
Yeah. So you mean specifically for supply chain attacks?
Yeah, in general, like the current challenges. Yeah, if there's anything.
So one very important thing that I also think will become more and more relevant is that we better understand the impact of certain vulnerabilities. What I mean by that, and I would actually like to go back for a few seconds to the Spring for Shell vulnerability. If you look how this vulnerability was exploited, it had a lot of very specific conditions that need to be fulfilled in order to exploit it. It needs to run Java greater than 9. It needs to be deployed on a Tomcat server. It needs to be deployed on a var file, for example. That was very specific things that were written in the vulnerability description. So it means if anything of this was not fulfilled, you cannot exploit it. And so if we better understand all these different conditions and the context that a certain vulnerability is in, we can much better assess the impact a certain vulnerability can have. And so it's not always the best solution to just say, hey, just upgrade. If you have a vulnerable Spring framework running somewhere in your environment, just upgrade. You have to really consider the entire context, the entire infrastructure that it's running in. And so if we find a good way to better do that and to better understand all those conditions, make it processable and somehow gather all this information, then we just can much better protect ourselves, because we can say, okay, I know I have this vulnerability, but it would actually maybe be worse to replace it with another thing, for example, right? But I can turn a lot of other knobs basically to prevent a certain exploit of this.
And I think that's great. I mean, we don't want to use the podcast here for commercials on what we are doing during the day, right? We work for Dynatrace, and I think the AppSec capability that we have exactly brings that context as you just explained. And we know not just that there is a particular version of Log4j shell on your file system, but we know exactly, was it loaded into an environment that meets all of the criteria. Now, but here's a question for you. Is the description of vulnerabilities good enough? That means, is there a standard that is currently already available that we get from the vulnerability databases out there? Or I know we are integrating with Snook, for instance, and maybe others as well. Is that description that detailed, that it contains all this information, the context?
Unfortunately not. And it sometimes has those information, but it hasn't. It has it in a written way. So not like in a machine readable way, just in a human readable way. And it's often also not accurate enough, or there are mistakes in it. And if you look at a certain vulnerability description, you have a lot of information that maybe also points to different links, points to a repository where someone tried out the exploit, or there's a security advisory from that company or from another company. And if you somehow would be able to put all these things together, then you might get all this information. But this is incredibly hard to do. And so, yeah, short answer, no, it does not have this information. That information might be somewhere, but it's hard to get. It's
not just one click and you got what you need. It's one click and then you might have to go do more research on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and then try to put that all together. That's completely news to me. I always thought, like, when you read the CVEs or whatever, it's like, yep, this is all you need. It's interesting to find out that it's a lot more complicated. And you also said machine readable, which I thought was very interesting, because as you and Andy were discussing this topic, I couldn't help but think about, you talked about automatically, moving to the next version to upgrade and all, but I think obviously upgrading is a large factor, keeping on top of the latest fixes and the latest security patches, but that I think for a lot of organizations is a hard thing to do, because you update code, you got to go through a whole cycle, you got to go through testing, verification, whatever. You update a component of your operating system, at least in the past, they would do the same thing, right? Because you don't know how that's going to interact with your code or anything else. Same thing with the packages. Okay, yeah, we're going from Java 9 to Java 9.2. Well, what changed in there? How's that going to impact? We got to go through this whole cycle. And when you're not utilizing an automated pipeline in this process, you're slowing yourself down. It's not going to solve everything, but like with this whole machine readable idea, when people look at, do we take the time, do we slow down our release cycle to really automate our pipeline and do things as automatically as we can to save as much time in that and be as agile in that as we can be? Oftentimes the answer is no, because they want to focus on the business, but this then is putting them or increasing their vulnerability, because they cannot take action quickly. They cannot stay on top of these things. If it was no problem to say, okay, we'll put the latest one in, that'll cost us maybe a half a day in the pipe. I mean, I'm just making up a thing. As opposed to a week and a half in the old days, fantastic. You have a lot more ability to stay on top and not get hit. Because when you do get hit by these things, it's much, much more impactful, right? But I think everybody, as we were doing earlier where we were covering our eyes, everybody likes to hide their head in the sand and say, it's not going to happen here. It's not going to happen to me. And we'll just keep going along as if it's not going to happen to me until it does, and then
exactly,
pay a huge price. But the bringing it back, machine readable would fit right into that whole bit, right? Because then it could just be part of this automated cycle, right? So
right, yeah. As you say, sometimes it's really hard to just update a certain library or a certain component in your entire IT system, right? But if you say, hey, instead of updating, I can just block certain types of network packets or limit the rate of certain type of network packets to prevent a certain vulnerability, that might be much easier than just update a library everywhere.
Hey, Stefan, I know in your list you also had the human factor. That's obviously a big topic. The human is always sometimes the weakest link. But considering that the time that we've been already more than 30 minutes in, I would like to skip this one and just go into the next big section that is really interesting, because we talked about the past, we talked about the present, but now we need to talk about what's evolving, what's happening, what's coming this year, what do we need to look out for? What are some of the trends that you see out there in cybersecurity in 2023?
Yeah, so AI is and will be, and also was in the past years, still a big topic for cybersecurity. And there are really multiple angles here. That the recent developments in AI. I know everybody's just talking about ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. You tell it, hey, write me a function in Python, and it does it for whatever you want to do it. So it's. I think we will see very soon that AI will develop its own malware. So that's the trend is certainly going into that direction. But on the other hand, also AI is very important to help defend against threats, against attacks, to detect them. You have to consider that most of the security products we currently have in the industry, and I'm talking about antivirus software, firewalls, and so on, are mostly still pattern matching and signature based. So just, I know something that happened in the past from an attack, and now I look if I see this pattern again. This is still like the majority how it works. But AI can help with that, because AI is not just making a 0 or 1 decision. AI can also understand some of the context if you have appropriate models. So AI is having an angle. It can be used for attacking, but it can also be used for defending. So it's really a double-sided sword, as you want to say. And then maybe a third factor that we also have to consider, AI is attackable itself. It's actually still a very hot topic in security research, that you can actually fool an AI. And I've also seen certain tweets about ChatGPT where people ask it something and it replied complete nonsense. And you can do that that's actually already like a few years ago. But if you think about self-driving cars, people have been shown that you can very easily fool how an AI, for example, detects certain traffic signs. If you just manipulate a few things on a stop sign that would be identified as a stop sign, right? And an AI that's in a car, for example, would identify it as a, speed limit sign. Because especially if you think about those very deep neural networks that are usually applied for those kind of tasks, just I would say a handful of people really understand how they work, because it's such complex system and such complex mathematical systems that we don't fully understand them yet, and they are much easier to fool than you actually think. And so those are really those three factors that AI itself can be used for attacking, for defending, but then AI itself is not secure yet. And that's really a big research field that I think we will have to invest much more time into it. Yeah. So I could talk much longer about the AI thing, because there are many challenges, but many opportunities when it comes to AI. Also to just make a system behave accurately, that it can be applied in a security context. It's really not trivial in AI system. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It almost sounds like you're describing, at least in the beginning part of the AI, the Marvel movie version of Ultron. Right, as it's going through and trying to find all the attack vectors and all, it suddenly starts realizing, oh, there's all these attack vectors. I can take care of them and then run everything. But the simple fact of the matter, it's very interesting that you talked about these applications with AI, because just yesterday I heard two stories about AI. One was about ChatGPT and its use in schools, and how some teachers are, they know it's inevitable. They know these things are going to be there, so they're trying to find good ways to use them. But the other challenge teachers are finding is kids will go in and be like, write me a paper about Wuthering Heights, right, or some book, and it's spitting out an essay for them. So now there's the challenge of trying to detect and identify AI-written essays, which is very similar along this other thing, right? I also heard a story on NPR last night about the self-driving car, the Tesla self-driving feature, and somebody did a test with it, and they described it as being a driving instructor. It's not relaxing at all. It's like being a driving instructor, because you kind of have to keep your eyes on it, making sure it's not doing the wrong thing and questioning what it's doing. However, so they were describing it almost like, I feel like I'm driving with a fourth grader behind the wheel. But a few years ago, it felt like driving with a kindergartner behind the wheel. And where they were going with this is going to keep getting better. The AI, whether it's security, whether it's anything, is going to keep getting better. So to your point, we have to get on top of it. And I think we asked this question to someone else. I think they were originally from the United States, so they had a little bit of a conflicted view. I'm curious as to your more worldly view. You said, with a lot of this AI stuff and the security is going to take a lot of investment, right? Just like with the field of antibiotics, I don't see a desire for companies to invest into this unless there's an incentive. And that incentive is usually in the form of harsh penalties for being in violation or having some sort of, having to pay a fee. Like right now, your credit card data gets stolen. They give you this meaningless, we'll keep an eye on your credit card history for a year, and then we automatically enroll you and you start paying us. Right? It's all just like, there's no real penalty for getting hacked. There's no real penalty for having lax security. But if you talk about that funding, you talk about that investment, from where you sit, you've seen a lot of the development on Silicon Valley side, let's just say, I'm not sure exactly where you were, a bunch of different other areas. Do you feel that the industry, just based on your experience, would actually be motivated to put enough time and money into this without being incentivized by penalties? or do you think some sort of government regulation, which sometimes is not always perfect, obviously, would be required for us to see a real improvement here?
To be honest, it is a very hard question to answer because how should I start? So nobody likes to have, or no company wants to have a security issue, a vulnerability in their product, right?
Right.
And usually you don't put this in. So vulnerabilities can happen. Systems are just so complex, and that especially is true for AI, that I feel like it's often out of control, and it's hard to basically predict what can happen and what will not happen with certain use cases. When you, for example, put out a product that is trained on certain data, you don't really know how it will behave in a different environment. That actually brings me to one important point that I have on my list, and this is about data regulations in different geographical areas. So, as I mentioned, I worked for many years in the United States, and I did a lot of work in data science and training machine learning models, for example. And I was not able to work with European data because I was sitting physically in the United States, and GDPR prevents me from looking at European data, which has a lot of good effects for personal privacy. But you have to also consider that a lot of digital products that we use around the world are developed in the United States and maybe only trained on data that is collected in the United States or in certain geographical areas because of regulations like that. And especially in security, you see different attack trends based on different geographical locations. And so does it mean that a product that's developed in the US based on US data does not work as well in Europe? Potentially, yes. But it's hard to answer, right? So that's what I mean. It's sometimes out of developers' control that you say, in whatever context my products are applied, they might behave in a way that I cannot predict. And if penalties will motivate companies, probably to have some minimal standards, yeah, I think. But it would not prevent all kinds of security flaws, all kinds of vulnerabilities. Just, I would say, like a minimum level, maybe.
Yeah, I just
does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think those are fantastic points. And I think tying into that, all that kind of stuff is driven, like everything is driven by money in a lot of ways. So if companies are on the hook for having that security, they're going to need products for that security, right? So someone developing a product isn't going to be really incentivized to develop a good product if no one's buying it, right? But if the companies that use them will get penalized for having flaws, then these companies will have, purchases going on. That then may, and again, I'm talking about, fantasy world here though, but that then may lead to a demand for better, smarter regulation to say, hey, GDPR, we're doing this. We need to have something worked out here. And then maybe finally on the political level, people will be like, we should really have some smart tech people on these boards who really understand, as opposed to people who get appointed because they donate money, right? Because that usually seems to be the way in politics. But if you get real data scientists, real IT people who know all these things, then you can finally get the regulations that would be good to help, penalize the bad actors, but also make it plausible that we get good products and get good flowing. But I just, in my own personal view, I see without that penalty on the end companies, where's the rest of the money going to come from to support the rest of that ecosystem so that it happens? Like even with the chat GPT, you're talking about building the security and all that kind of stuff. Well, what's the incentive, right? If it's not money in a business world. But I mean, there is fun stuff.
Yeah, especially with chat GPT, like who would really prevent it from
writing malware?
Or yeah, exactly, writing malware. Yeah, if you tell it, hey, write me a malware that does this and this, it might be able to do it.
Hey, I need to keep a little bit of an eye on the watch here because I think, first of all, Stefan, I think we should do a follow-on because you have a long list of additional things you wanted to talk about. And now I don't want to cut you short now because I think there is one thing that reminds me of the last recording we had. You in your document that you share with us, you talk about the continuous move to the cloud, and the number one thing you list there is actually misconfiguration of systems. Often is a source of data breaches and attacks. Brian, we had Nico Meisenthal here just a couple of weeks ago, and he basically walked through how to hack a Kubernetes cluster. He does a couple of these sessions also at different conferences where and there's some YouTube recordings from him. But in case you want to see it or listen to our episode, Nico Meisenthal, it's a great thing. So misconfiguration, and then you also mentioned that cloud is getting more complex. Any additional thoughts on this? Because I think this is important. A lot of our listeners are obviously already in the cloud, but moving even more into the cloud. I would like to kind of wrap this up from a security trend perspective 2023 with this particular topic. Any additional things you want to talk about here would be awesome.
Yeah, especially what you mentioned, Kubernetes clusters is here to stay, right? And it's getting more and more applied. And we actually do research to understand the different impacts of vulnerabilities that you potentially have in a system, that they have with different configurations that are deployed in a Kubernetes cluster deployment, and that can really go from an attacker can almost do nothing until an attacker can take over your entire cluster based on your Kubernetes configuration. And so this is not only true for Kubernetes, this is true for a lot of things that you have in the cloud. So to really understand how all things are connected together and how different configurations of systems impact other things that you have, impact how attackers can exploit vulnerabilities, or how they can move around in your system if they maybe already have one foot in the door. That's a real interesting problem to understand, and something that we need to better understand. What are those impacts of misconfiguration? So yeah, this will be interesting to maybe do a follow-up, because I think there's much more to talk about this.
Yeah, exactly. Nico also in his presentation, he did not only take over the cluster, he then got access to the tokens to the cloud vendor, the cloud provider, and then basically started spinning up like virtual machines everywhere. I mean, that's even worse.
Giving people ideas, Andy.
Yeah, it's not me. I'm just telling the story from Nico. Yeah. And Stefan, to conclude this, right? I mean, it's great to know that somebody like you with that type of experience stays in that field, does the research, and I think we can be lucky from a Dynatrace perspective to have somebody like you that is then also impacting our product. Yeah. Because I assume you're not just doing research and talking a podcast, but a lot of the stuff that you're finding out, make it into better security products, and we happen to be in that field as well, which is just awesome to know.
Exactly. Yeah, that's our goal, to use all this research that we are doing. That is can be often very experimental, but to really get useful features out of that will eventually go into our product, and then help customers to better understand, or to better be able to handle a lot of things that I talked about today: impacts of vulnerabilities, better configure system, limit what attackers can do in a certain system. That's what I'm very passionate about it, and I'm really very glad and honored and happy that I can work in this field.
Yeah, and clearly you're not looking away like we did in the beginning when we took the picture. You're not looking away from all of these new threats. Stefan,
we're looking right at it.
You're looking right at it, exactly. Just maybe as a final word, I know in your document you had like the last section. I think when I read it, I think there's an interesting warning, or like a stating effect, right? That there will be another Log4Shell, whatever it's going to be called. We want to be prepared for it. And I think we should all do whatever we can to play our role. And it may just start with something very simple. And also reading from a document when you talk about many of us that have, thanks to the pandemic, only worked from home for a while and only saw our colleagues maybe through a small video, and they never turned on the video, so we don't even know how our colleagues look like. And then we think we meet them in person. Maybe we don't meet that person, that colleague in person, and maybe it's somebody else, right? So I think there's a lot of things we need to be aware of, and it starts with all of us, I think, from a human perspective.
I could not agree more to that. Yeah, the human factor is still the biggest factor in cybersecurity and defending against attacks, and just considering on what link you click on, but even just the information that you share on social media. This is we could do another podcast about that. Is all. It's not just the impact from a technical side, right? It's the impact that information can really have in the wrong hands. And I think we are getting way too we are worrying way too much, or way too less what is really happening with all the information that we put out there about ourselves.
That's why it's important for everybody to complete their compliance training, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It does cover some of that, like talking about things in public, though. It's funny.
Yeah, on the other side, it's also sad, especially because we're heavily involved in open source, and open source also lives from the contributions, but also public speaking out for that you're using an open source project, you like it, right? It also lives from the advocacy. And if all of a sudden companies can no longer publicly talk about that they're using a certain project or supporting it because they don't want to reveal the secrets, it will hinder some of these projects to actually become more popular.
Yeah,
it's a tough world we live in. Yeah,
it looks like the more popular an open source project becomes, the more targeted it'll be, because it's just a more attractive bounty, right? It's
that is true. Yeah, that is true.
Mm-hmm.
I personally want to say, go on.
Mm-hmm. No, I was just saying, any final words, any final comments that you want to add?
Yeah, this was awesome to really talk about. I had a lot of fun, and I think we already have 2 or 3 more topics that we could do a follow up.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about this, and it was fun talking with you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I think the interesting thing is, we had some high-level discussion. We've also had some lower-level discussion, and I think that's what keeps the security discussions really interesting, because there's the higher-level theory and conceptual stuff, but then we're also diving into some of the specifics. And one of the reasons I specifically want to have you back on is because I also think one of the keys is just having people talking about it, having people find an interest in the subject, even if they're not getting into the deep details of it. Keeping it on people's mind is the first thing, just like safety in anything. Keep it in your mind, you're aware of it, you're going to start thinking of it more, and maybe not get your secrets on your Kubernetes cluster stolen from Andy. Yeah, and you know what, Andy, I should have known. You talked about meeting people in public. I should have known when I heard your weird voice in the alley that it wasn't really you, that it was some imposter Andy who had my kids.
Clearly, because we haven't seen each other in real life for too many years, and maybe I've completely changed.
Maybe, because I can't see you right now. Yeah.
I know.
Anyhow.
All deep fakes.
Andy went for plastic surgery. He went out to LA and got hooked.
I got more hair. Maybe I should do this. But if you see me the next time and I have more hair here on my forehead, then well.
All right. Well, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Andy, for setting this up. As always, I'm really appreciative of the fascinating topics, and I hope our listeners are too. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and talk to you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.